Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. India reveals new measures against Pakistan a day after 26 people were killed in a deadly attack in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Steps include closing the main border, suspending a key water treaty and expelling Pakistani diplomats. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky clash once again over ending the war in Ukraine, as Trump slams Kiev's refusal to accept Russia's hold on Crimea. US Vice President J.D. Vance warns that if both sides don't agree to a deal soon, Washington may quit its role as mediator. A reported 9 people are killed and over 63 are wounded in a Russian missile strike on Kiev. The attack on the Ukrainian capital has seen residential buildings damaged and the search for people under rubble is underway. After January clashes involving M23 rebels, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda vow to pursue peace. A deal signed in Doha offers a rare sign of hope that the long-running conflict could see a turn towards calm. A dozen US states has joined together to make a lawsuit aiming to block President Donald Trump's tariffs that have ended up global trade. The suit is headed by New York's Governor General and says the president lacked the authority to impose the tariffs. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Iran must not enrich uranium under any deal with Washington, even as talks continue. Iran, however, has insisted that zero enrichment is unacceptable, making compromise hard to reach. A New York jury heard opening statements in the retrial of disgraced Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. The Mirror-Act's co-founder faces charges of sexual abuse and harassment against 3 women, allegedly using his power to exploit them. A 6.2 magnitude earthquake hit the city of Istanbul, leaving more than 150 injured after they jumped from buildings yesterday. President Erdogan says that the authorities are monitoring the situation after one building collapsed in the Turkish city. Our top story today: in the wake of the deadly terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam, which claimed 26 lives, India has taken several strong measures, including withholding access to the official X account of the government of Pakistan. This follows the announcement of retaliatory actions such as the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty and the expulsion of senior Pakistani diplomatic staff. This diplomatic fallout follows the Pahalgam attack and a meeting chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who condemned the attack and vowed swift retaliation. On Wednesday, India summoned Pakistan's charge d'affaires in New Delhi, declaring Pakistan's military diplomats persona non grata. India also announced it would suspend the Indus Water Treaty, which governs the sharing of the Indus River's waters. Furthermore, Pakistan nationals will no longer be allowed to travel to India under the SAARC visa exemption scheme. Let's take a listen to what the Foreign Minister of India had to say.
The CCS reviewed the overall security situation and directed all forces to maintain high vigil. It resolved that the perpetrators of this attack will be brought to justice and their sponsors held to account. India will be unrelenting in the pursuit of those who have committed acts of terror or conspired to make them possible. Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the United States has issued a travel advisory for Jammu and Kashmir. Operations are ongoing and Indian Railway is assisting in evacuating stranded tourists from Katra and Udhampur. Funeral processes continue as the nation mourns the loss of the lives of innocent civilians. We are joined by our reporter and correspondent Brian Thomas for NewsX World, live from Kulgram in Jammu and Kashmir. Brian, what updates can you bring us on this developing situation?
You know, there was, in response to the Pahalgam massacre that happened on April 22nd, the Cabinet Committee adopted 5 major measures. That was obviously the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, the closure of the Atari Wagah border, the expulsion and downgrading of diplomatic missions, and even cancelling the SAARC visa exemptions also, and withdrawal from regional engagement itself. Very importantly, clearly, yes, the US also issued an advisory also. US State Department said that there should be a do not travel advisory for the region, and the advisory cites persistent threats of the civil unrest, and advisory also warns of sporadic violence along the LOC, separating both India and Pakistan. And even the US State Department categorized India at level 2, advising travelers to exercise caution due to the crime and tension, and designated level 4, do not travel due to the heightened security concerns. Very importantly, yes, the place we are at becomes very important. We are at this very place which is called the Kulgam, where yesterday there was a gun battle that erupted between security forces and terrorists in Jammu Kashmir. And that happened hours after the Indian Army thwarted an infiltration attempt along the LOC itself. And very importantly, where we are, there was earlier in the day also, there was these attacks, these gunfights that had happened also. There was a team that was closed in on a suspected hideout. Officials also reached out and started a security forces launched as a coordinate search operation in the Tangmang area of the Kulgam, Kulgam district where we are right now. These are, I'll just try to attempt to show you. This is the place where we are. This is the area, Tangmang area of Kulgam, where the gunfiring between the terror group and the security agencies that happened yesterday, and now the agencies, the security forces, the GNK police, the Indian Army, the paramilitary troops, they have all been vigilant. They've all started coordinate search operations. They are going to the forest area and the mountains to have an understanding and to see and assess. And there's a search operation also going on at this very place where we are right now. Yes.
Brian Thomas, thank you very much for joining us, and we will bring you all updates in this developing story. Now over to Europe. US President Donald Trump and the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, clashed again on efforts to end the 3-year war in Ukraine, with the US leader rebuking Zelensky for refusing to recognize Russia's occupation of Crimea. Trump's Vice President, J.D. Vance, said it was time for Russia and Ukraine to either agree to the US's peace proposal or they should be ready to see the US walk away from this process. On the other hand, Zelensky has reiterated that Ukraine would never cede Crimea to Russia. Let's take a listen in to what the President of Ukraine said.
Тільки ми починаємо говорити про Крим, про наші суверенні території тощо, ми заходимо в формат, якого і хоче Росія, затягування війни, тому що швидко домовитись про все не вийде. І Україна не визнає юридично окупацію Криму. Мам про що говорити. Це поза нашою Конституцією. Це наша територія. Територія народу України. Ми не можемо просто, а чому би ні? Чого не буде? Мені здається, що
With his Ukrainian counterpart that Crimea was lost to Russia a long time ago and is even not a point of discussion and is only making peace harder to achieve. Here is what the director of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House, James Nixey, said on the issue of Trump's view on Russia-Ukraine peace process.
Absolutely walk away from the Ukraine talks. This is a very different America to the one we saw 12 months ago, one which does not particularly care about the fate of Ukraine. As a result of that, if it doesn't get what it wants first time around, if it doesn't get to solve the problem as it claimed and boasted it could do, then it would seem to be a reasonable play for this administration not to get into the quagmire that it perceives as being the Russia.
Later in a post on X, Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his views on the London talks. He mentioned that the talks among US, Ukrainian and European officials were marked by high emotions, but also expressed hope that the future might bring peace. Zelensky is now in South Africa, where he is expected to meet international leaders as the United States is trying to broker peace talks with Russia. We stay in the same region now, where at least 9 people have been killed and more than 60 have been injured, including children, in a devastating overnight Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. These strikes triggered multiple fires and left a residential building destroyed, with fears that more victims could be trapped under the rubble. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko confirmed the casualties, and rescue teams are working tirelessly, using sniffer dogs to search for survivors. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, explosions were reported, injuring at least 2 people and causing damage to private homes. Ukrainian authorities have warned that virtually all regions of the country are under threat of further airstrikes. This attack comes just hours after US President Donald Trump accused Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of hindering peace efforts, particularly after Zelensky reaffirmed that Ukraine will not recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea. Russia currently holds around 20% of Ukrainian territory after launching their Ukrainian invasion in 2022. The attack underscores the ongoing and escalating violence in the war, with no signs of de-escalation in sight as both sides continue to clash. Moving on now, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the high tariffs imposed on China by the Trump administration are not sustainable, signaling a potential shift in US trade policy. Bessent emphasized that the current 145% tariff on Chinese goods and the 125% on US products cannot last in the long term, noting that both sides acknowledge the unsustainability of these levels. Let's take a listen in to what Bessent had to say.
China's current economic model is built on exporting its way out of its economic troubles. It's an unsustainable model that is not only harming China, but the entire world.
Meanwhile, President Trump has indicated that he may resume tariffs on Chinese imports, depending on the outcome of ongoing trade talks. This is what Trump had to say on making a trade deal with China.
Well, that depends on them. We have a situation where we have a very, very great place. It's called the United States of America, and it's been ripped off for years and years. These people know it. We talked about it.
In a related development, 12 US states have filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, arguing that the tariffs are essentially tax hikes that were imposed without congressional approval. The lawsuit states that tariffs must be approved by Congress and questioned Trump invoking a 1970s law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to enact the levies. The International Monetary Fund has also weighed in, warning that the tariffs will slow global economic growth and exacerbate debt levels. In the tech sector, SK Hynix, a key supplier to Nvidia, reported a surge in its first quarter profit, driven by strong demand for AI chips. However, the company also flagged potential risks to demand in the second half of the year, citing uncertainties related to tariffs. Moving on once again, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has emphasized that any deal with Iran would require the country to stop enriching uranium, limiting its nuclear program to civilian use. However, Iranian officials have made it very clear that they will not negotiate away their right to enrich uranium, calling zero enrichment unacceptable. These comments come ahead of crucial talks between the US and Iran in Oman on Saturday. While the US aims to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear bomb, Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful. The ongoing talks come amid growing concerns over Iran's uranium enrichment, which has been ramping up to 60% purity, close to weapons-grade levels. The US has reiterated that if Iran wants a peaceful nuclear program, it can import enriched material, as many other nations do. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also commented on the ongoing talks. Let's take a listen to his comments.
משטר האימים באיראן הוא איום לגורלו ולקיומו ולקיומה, לא רק של עתידנו, אלא לגורלם ולעתידה של החברה האנושית כולה. זה מה שיהיה אם הוא ישיג נשק גרעיני. המאבק בינינו לבין אימפריית הטרור בטהרן יחרוץ את גורלן של כל החברות החופשיות. אם ישראל תפסיד חלילה במערכה זו, מדינות המערב תהיינה הבאות בתור.
Moving over to Africa now, the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels pledged in statements released after talks in Qatar to work on peace after violence escalated in January, raising fears of a wider regional war. Their agreement raises hopes that the descent into violence after the decades-long conflict rooted in the Rwandan genocide might ease. The talks come after the M23 rebel group has staged an unprecedented advance since January, seizing eastern Congo's two largest cities in an assault that killed thousands in the region. After some time, both the Congolese government and the M23 rebel group came to the negotiating table in mid-March. Two sources in the new delegations, however, have expressed frustration over the pace of the negotiations. Each of the sides released the same statement separately after their delegations departed Qatar earlier in the week, following more discussions. The statement said, both parties reaffirm their commitment to an immediate cessation of hostilities. The statement described the talks as frank and constructive, but it was unclear if or when another round of talks would take place. We move over to the Middle East now, where Israeli airstrikes on Gaza continued on Wednesday, resulting in at least 45 deaths and more than 100 injuries, according to the Gazan-run health ministry. The ongoing attacks, which have intensified following the end of the January ceasefire in March, include strikes on civilian shelters, schools and homes, according to some reports. A particularly devastating attack on a school-turned-shelter in Gaza City left 10 people dead, with reports of survivors still trapped under rubble. Meanwhile, Hamas has released a new video showing 48-year-old Israeli hostage Omri Miran. In the video, Miran is seen marking his birthday in captivity, walking through a tunnel in Gaza and lighting a candle. His family confirmed his identity, but they did not approve the video's release, though they allowed a screenshot to be shared. On the other hand, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called on Hamas to release all hostages on Wednesday, emphasizing that keeping them in captivity gives Israel an excuse to continue its military campaign in Gaza. He further called Hamas sons of dogs and has called for the disarmament of the group. Abbas's statement came as rescuers recovered charred bodies from a recent Israeli airstrike on the enclave. We stay in the region where, according to multiple reports coming out in Yemen, the Iran-backed Houthi rebels have stepped up their propaganda efforts amid the intensifying US airstrikes following a deadly bombing on April the 14th, which killed 80 people at a fuel port. The Houthis released a video showing their special forces training with dramatic imagery of soldiers firing at American, Israeli and British flags. The rebels, who have aligned themselves with Iran's axis of resistance against the US and Israel, have targeted both Israel and maritime traffic, launching missiles and drones in retaliation to attacks on Yemen. This comes after a brief ceasefire during the Israel-Hamas war, which has now collapsed. Meanwhile, US airstrikes on Houthi positions in Yemen have claimed over 200 lives since mid-March, with tensions remaining high. Let's move on once again, where French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot, during his first visit to Iraq on April the 23rd, emphasized the importance of Iraq remaining neutral in the volatile Middle East. Barrot praised Iraq's efforts to maintain stability and urged the country to avoid being dragged into conflicts that it did not choose. His visit comes amid regional tensions, including the Israel-Hamas conflict, and aims to bolster support for a two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Barrot's tour also includes Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and he is preparing for an international conference later this year on the two-state solution. President of Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan region, Narakvan Barzani, also met with the visiting French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot in April. during the latter's first visit to the country. Let us listen in to what the French minister stated.
Solidarité aussi face aux conséquences des conflits qui bouleversent toute la région. Les foyers de crise sont nombreux, de la guerre de Gaza aux tensions avec l'Iran, en passant par les conséquences de la chute de Bachar al-Assad et les défis de la transition syrienne.
Let's move over to South America for our next story. Miners in Bolivia are protesting a critical economic crisis marked by massive fuel shortages. These protests have brought the Bolivian administrative capital, La Paz, to a standstill. There were huge groups of protesters seen marching through the city blocks in several avenues. Bolivia, a major producer of silver, zinc, lithium and tin, has for months been experiencing a shortage of dollars in its economy, crippling the country to the brink of economic collapse. The lack of currency fluidity in the country has led to massive shortages in fuel imports, causing goods prices to soar in turn, which has caused a substantial plummeting effect on the agricultural and mining output. Let's take a listen to what the protesters had to say.
En el oriente hemos estado sufriendo mucho por diésel, por gasolina, sufrimos mucho para la siembra, ahora estamos en la cosecha más grande del país, 1.6 millones de hectáreas sembramos en el oriente. ¿Para qué? Para que esta cadena productiva sea perfecta. Si producimos más como agropecuarios, los transportistas van a transportar más, el gremial va a vender más, el industrial va a procesar más y el exportador todos los excedentes los va a llevar para atrás.
Hay que cambiar ese modelo, no sirve. No es gastar la plata. Aquí hay que cambiar un modelo basado en un sistema de producción, basado con 4 pilares. Familia, lo más importante. Seguridad jurídica, propiedad privada, tecnología.
We move from South America to Australasia now, where Australia will stockpile critical minerals in a new strategic reserve. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said as nations scramble to source rare earths and coveted metals outside China. Australia's Labor government has committed to an initial 1.2 billion Australian dollar investment to establish this strategic reserve. This reserve is aimed at reducing Australia's reliance on China, which currently controls much of the global supply chain for vital minerals such as lithium, nickel and cobalt. These metals are essential components in technologies ranging from smartphones to electric vehicles. Australia is rich in these minerals, but they are often sold as raw ore to Chinese processing factories. Albanese stated that by stockpiling these resources domestically, Australia could better leverage its mineral wealth, ensuring it can respond to both local and international demands. He also said that the reserve will not only help secure Australia's economic future, but also provide a bargaining chip in future global trade talks, particularly with major partners like the United States, Japan and Germany, who are seeking alternatives to China's dominance. This plan comes as the demand for critical minerals continues to rise. The reserve is expected to be fully operational by the second half of 2026. Let's listen in to Albanese's comments.
Now we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to stake Australia's claim to secure our country's place in the international value chain, to leverage our natural resources in our national interest. It will mean we can deal with trade and market disruptions from a position of strength, because Australia will be able to call on an internationally significant quantity of resources in global demand. The strategic reserve will draw on our critical minerals facility, which we will expand by a further $1 billion, bringing the total investment to $5 billion.
Let's turn back to the Middle East. Jordan has outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood, the country's most vocal opposition group, and confiscated its assets on Wednesday after members of the group were found to be linked to a sabotage plot. Interior Minister Mazen Fraya said. The Interior Minister stated that all activities of the group would be banned henceforth. The ban includes publishing anything by the group and closure and confiscation of all its offices and property. Let's take a listen in to what the minister had to say.
وانطلاقا من حرصنا الأكيد على سلامة مجتمعنا وتحصينه من الأعمال التي تعكر صفو الأمن والنظام وتشوه الممارسات السياسية الفضلى، وللمحافظة على الأمن والاستقرار فقد تقرر ما يلي: أولاً، العمل على الإنفاذ الفوري لأحكام القانون على ما يسمى بجماعة الإخوان المسلمين المنحلة باعتبارها جمعية.
International rights groups say that in the last 4 years, Jordanian authorities have intensified persecution and harassment of political opponents and ordinary citizens, using a string of laws to silence critical voices. However, the Jordanian government says it tolerates public speech that does not incite violence. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more global news updates. Thank you.